What's up, you guys? I'm Natasha. This is Shepherding Pepper's Farm, and today we are making bagels. A few different types of bagels, actually. We're going to be doing cheese bagels, everything bagels, and bagel bites. You know those fun little mini bagel bites that you can get at the grocery section in the freezer area? It's like little pizza bagels, kind of. Well, we're going to be making those today, and I hadn't planned on doing it. It just sort of came to my mind while I was in the process of making so many bagels, like, hey, this would be a fun thing to do. So we wound up doing that as well, and we're going to go over that process. Most of the time, though, the first part of my day starts with homeschooling, which is what you're seeing here. You're also seeing snacking. We've been really obsessed with bean dip in our house lately, so I was munching on that while doing the homeschool stuff with the kids. You can see Landon getting in on the bean dip action. It's really good. It's really simple and easy to make. It's just beans cooked in the Instapot with a stick of butter and a decent dollop of sour cream blended together with some taco seasoning, and it's fabulous. A great way to get some good iron into your system. All right, so we're going to talk about the basics of making bagels. There are many different bagel recipes that you're going to find online that you can look up. For me, I'm going to start by taking about 3 cups of milk, and I'm going to warm this up in my microwave. This is important for the process of proofing, because when you are trying to get your yeast to proof, having warm liquid helps significantly. You don't want it too hot because that can actually kill the yeast. You want it just a nice warm temperature. Then we're going to add into this a tablespoon of yeast. The majority of recipes that you find online say 2.5 teaspoons of yeast, and that's because that is what comes in the little instant yeast packets. We use somewhere between that and a tablespoon, so I always just say a tablespoon because it's really not that big of a deal. A dash of salt, and then 1/4 of a cup of powdered sugar. Mix this together and let this proof. That just basically means that your yeast has bubbled up and you can see it kind of floating at the top. And then we're going to add into this 4 cups of water. Now I'm making a lot of bagels here. It'll be very easy to divide this recipe in half, especially if you don't have as big of a family as we do and not make quite as many bagels as we did. I will say that these freeze beautifully. And again, we're meal prepping, so it's easier for me to make a whole bunch of something at once and then not have to continue to make it every single week. If I bulk bake a bunch of bagels, then I only have to do this once a month rather than doing it once a week. And it is a little bit more time consuming, but bagels are ridiculously expensive in the grocery store. They are outrageous. I was absolutely shocked when I looked that up, so I will definitely be making those at home. Now, I typically estimate when I am baking any sort of bread or dough that you need twice the amount of flour that you do to wet liquids. So since we used 4 cups of water and 3 cups of milk, I am adding into this about 14 cups of flour. Then you're going to add into this 2 eggs. It helps bind the dough together. Once the dough is in the mixer, you want a drier dough. You're not looking for a sticky dough where you're having super light, fluffy loaves of bread. You want it on the drier side. So it's quite possible that you'll need to work into this an extra cup of flour. Just feel your dough. If it's still pretty sticky and tacky, add some more flour. You should be able to kind of tell if it's a bit of a drier, tougher dough. I divided this giant mix of bagels into 4 circles after this came out of the mixer. Divided it into 4 circles, and I let this rise for about an hour. Then I got out a digital scale, started cutting these up into rough pieces, I guess like 8, and started weighing them. I do weigh my bagels. This is kind of one of those things that I don't typically do when making pizza crust or bread dough, hot dog buns, most of the time. Sometimes I'll bust out a scale for hot dog buns and things like that, but not always. Whereas with bagels, I am pretty much always weighing the dough, and I am shooting for around 2.5 to 3 ounces for large size bagels and around 1 ounce for the mini bagels. So there is no magic way to shape bagels. They're not going to be perfectly consistent because you're a person and not a machine, and I don't recommend overly worrying about it. You want to roughly shape them into a ball, and then you're gonna use your thumb and your middle finger to punch a hole in the bagel and then slightly stretch it out. You don't want huge gaping holes in your bagel because it's not the way bagels should be. You want them to be somewhat on the smaller side. So if you overstretch it, just let it rise for longer. Now, as you can imagine, when you are making this many bagels, this process takes a while. If you are only making a small portion of bagels, you want to weigh out your dough, shape them, and then let it rise for a little bit on the counter. I would say probably about a half an hour or so, 45 minutes, depending on the temperature of your house. You don't need it to double in size because it's going to increase in size when you boil it, but you want it to have re-risen from the shaping process. That's pretty important here. Because of the fact that we are making so many bagels all at once, I don't have to worry about this because they're gonna sit out on the counter for a while. Now, a really important step in making bagels is to boil them in sugar water, or more specifically, honey water. So what I will do is I will fill up one of these pots on the stove. You can see I have two going at the same time here because there is a lot of bagels that we're making and I wanted to expedite the process. And I put about a cup of honey into each of these pots. We're gonna boil these for about a minute on each side for the larger bagels and 30 seconds on each side for the smaller bagels. So you're gonna flip it after a minute for the big ones and you'll flip it after 30 seconds for the small ones. If you overboil it in the water, you're going to have hard, deflated bagels. They won't look like that immediately when you take them out of the water, but if you let them sit on a cookie sheet, because your next step is going to be to bake these, you will watch them deflate and become hard and misshapen. So it's really important not to over boil your bagels. This is more of a challenge for me because I can easily get distracted and start doing other things, so I have to pay attention to that. After you've cooked your bagels on each side for the appropriate amount of time, you're going to throw these into the oven. Not literally throw them in there, but you're going to get them in the oven and start baking them. So you're going to want to preheat your oven to 425 around the time that you start the process of boiling your bagels. I would say that the larger ones bake for around 20 minutes, but I keep a pretty close eye on them. The smaller ones are much quicker, probably only about 10 to 12 minutes. And as always, I will either link in the description of the video our bagel recipe or a very similar bagel recipe. When I first started making bagels, I didn't come up with a recipe on my own. I used Sally's Baking Addiction. She is, I would assume Sally is an individual person, but I guess at this point it could be popular enough that they have multiple people working for the website. But the recipes that are there are wonderful. I've used them many, many times. I'll link that one below in the description because she's where I started learning to make bagels from. It was wonderful. Once you take your bagels out of your boiling honey water mixture and you get them on your cookie sheet, you don't have to worry about them really expanding much more. The process of boiling them is going to allow them to rise to their largest capacity, essentially. So I can fit 12 bagels on a large size cookie sheet very easily. And then you're going to go ahead and go through the process of putting on your toppings and making them into whatever type of bagel it is that you're looking for. So I just take a bag of shredded cheese and put it on top of the bagels, and then I will bake this in the oven for the time that we just mentioned. Now, if you are going to be making everything bagels like we do, I always brush the top of the bagel with an egg wash. It helps the everything bagel mixture to stick to the bagels. I will also link in the description of this video our recipe for making everything bagel seasoning. You can see I have an absolutely giant container of it because I really love everything bagels. They're wonderful. And after you brush your egg mixture on the top of your bagel, you're just going to dip this into your everything bagel seasoning mixture. You're going to want to make sure that the bagels have cooled a little bit at this point, otherwise you will burn your hands. Now this process can be repeated with many, many, many different types of bagels. You can put the egg wash on the top of the bagel, and then you could do black sesame bagels. You could do the traditional white sesame bagels. You could do poppy seed bagels. Even plain bagels, you're going to want to go ahead and brush with an egg wash. The only difference when you're making other types of bagels is, for example, if you're wanting to like a cinnamon bagels, I would add probably a tablespoon. I think most people would recommend putting a teaspoon worth of cinnamon into your dough, but I would probably add about a tablespoon. And then with cinnamon raisin bagels, you would do essentially the same thing. You would, while you're in the process of making the dough, add your cinnamon and your raisins into it. So you have loads of different possibilities when it comes to making bagels at home. Alright, bagel bites are super, super easy to make once you've mastered making the actual bagels at home. You're just going to slice them in half, put them back onto a cookie sheet, top them with some spaghetti sauce and mozzarella cheese, dice up some pepperonis, give them a really good chop, and sprinkle it on the top. Rebake these in the oven if you're wanting to eat them immediately. When we rebaked them, it only took like 10 minutes. You're essentially warming the sauce and melting the cheese. You're not having to bake the bagels, so you don't have to do a ton there. And then we actually put a few of these in the freezer, which was great because now I have something else that I can pull out for lunch in the future, and the kids really enjoyed these. And bonus, there is no preservatives in it, yay! Here you can see the bagel bites being ready to go into the freezer, and they look awesome. I don't know, I was really excited about this, mostly because it just kind of was a spur of the moment decision, and it turned out so excellent. So this is great. And then you can see our cheese bagels looking absolutely awesome and tasting fantastic. And these are the everything bagels. The kids always get really excited when bagels get made because I don't do it all the time. It's kind of a lot of my cooking tends to be spur of the moment. Oh, I've decided I'd like to do this. Alright, you guys, that is going to wrap up this video. I hope you try making bagels at home. I hope you enjoyed spending this time with me, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, y'all.